Welcome to the EduFaith Essentials Podcast. The EduFaith Essentials Podcast is an educational podcast that provides essential information and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. I'm your host, Dr. Nakia. Thank you for joining me, sending you good vibes here at EduFaith Essentials. The mission and vision of EduFaith Essentials is to bring positive awareness, to promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. EduFaith Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners and viewers with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. Let's begin with our EduFaith inspiration message. Exceptional dance. Cobb County School District puts on a dance every year, and they put on their dancing shoes every year. Since 2001, CCSD has paired up with student volunteers, the adapted PE department, and staff to host an exceptional student dance at a local high school. The district-wide event provides a magical experience for students with disabilities. A local high school gym was the setting, and it was transformed into a page out of a fairy tale for approximately 400 students from all middle and high schools across the district. And those students danced the day away. Elementary students were able to attend via live stream. Student volunteers with district level support began planning in August to ensure that every detail from transportation to decorations are in place to provide a special day for students with mobility limitations, sensory needs, and other needs that prevent them from accessing physical education without the support of the adaptive PE specialist. To find more information about this story, please follow the link, which will be on the EduFaith Essentials YouTube page. Now let's shift to some dates to remember. June is amongst us, and so we want to recognize some dates in June. June is Dyslexia Awareness Month. Let's work together to raise awareness and support for students with dyslexia and other learning differences. June is also recognized as Pride Month throughout the United States. This is a time to celebrate and support the LGBTQIA community, along with others across. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, because Father's Day is coming up. Want to recognize those wonderful father and male figures in our lives on the third Sunday, and we want to honor and appreciate the fathers and father figures who contribute to our families and to our society. June is also Flag Day. Flag Day is celebrated on June 14th, and it commemorates the adoption of the United States flag in 1977, and it's a day to reflect on the nation's history and values. And then finally, we want to recognize Juneteenth. Juneteenth is June 19th, and it is Emancipation Day. It's an annual holiday that's celebrated in June in the United States, and it commemorates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans and the end of slavery in the United States. So happy Juneteenth, happy Father's Day, happy Pride Month, happy Dyslexia Awareness Month, and happy Flag Day. Now let's shift to some essential news. Straight from the U.S. Department of Education, OSEP Director Valerie C. Williams addresses the unexpected realities of discipline in preschools. In a May 2020 release, the Office of Special Education Programs and the director addressed preschool suspension, expulsion, and informal removals in her May Discipline Discussions blog. She wrote about the stressful and isolating experiences created by removing children from their preschool environment. The National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, and the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems also provide resources to help parents and states and local programs and school leaders to support a child with preschool success and alleviate some of those discipline removals. Also in essential news, the U.S. Department of Education and Health and Human Services announced updated resources and proposed regulations for schools to deliver health care to eligible students. The resources in the proposed regulations represent part of the Biden-Harris administration's Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, implementation efforts and actions to address the nation's mental health crisis. When releasing this information, there was released a notice of proposed rulemaking under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to streamline Medicaid services with consent provisions when billing for Medicaid services provided through a student's IEP. Also, releasing a comprehensive guide to Medicaid services and administrative claiming, and then approving New Mexico and Oregon state plan amendments that allow Medicaid to pay for health services delivered through schools through their Medicaid enrolled students. The site and the information will be available on the EduFaith Essentials page. And with this whole initiative, the aim is to make it easier for schools to provide millions of students with health care, including mental health services. In a joint press release, the ED and the HHS announced those three departments to support the actions of the administration's National Mental Health Strategy. And so the notice of proposed rulemaking, the comprehensive guide to Medicaid services, and then approving New Mexico and Oregon state plan. All information will be on the EduFaith Essentials YouTube page. Please click the links and you can explore those resources. And that's going to be it for Essential News. For our essential knowledge for today, I noticed that I'm always talking about supporting and being passionate about diverse learners. So I said, why don't I define diverse learners for those who are not sure who are diverse learners and why I do what I do with EduFaith Essentials. So what we're going to talk about today is diverse learners. We're going to identify diverse learners and ways we can support diverse learners. So a diverse learner includes children and students of all abilities from racially, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic diverse communities and background. Diverse learners may be diverse in a variety of ways, but some of those ways include gender, ethnicity, linguistic, academic ability, a disability, physical ability or disability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religion, culture, personal backgrounds, and experiences. So, all of those things are some of the categories in which a student may be identified as a diverse learner. When you think about diverse learners, I want you to think about this as a perspective when you're looking into diverse learners and how prevalent diverse learners are in today's classrooms. In a classroom of 24 students today, between 10 and 12 students, 40 to 50% are living in poverty, have a disability or learning difference, are English learners, are gifted or talented, are experiencing challenges at home or in their communities that result in trauma or some combination of the above of each of whom research shows differentiated approaches to learning is needed. So when I talk about EduFaith Essentials and supporting diverse learners, these are the students that I aim to talk about. These are the students that I aim to support. And why? Because our platform and our world is changing and diversity, equity, inclusion is everywhere. So we want to make sure that we identify ways to teach, instruct, and provide that equal level playing field for all students, regardless of their backgrounds. When you're looking at supporting diverse learners and recognizing diverse learners are identified by various diversity links, like I said. So those links may be any of these or a combination of these characteristics. You want to recognize that diverse learners are unique, and what makes them unique is their linguistic background, is their academic background, is their social economic status. And you want to make sure that you accommodate diversity by creating learning environments that allow every student to achieve his or her personal best within the realm of each person's individualism. Value diversity. We want to value diversity by moving from tolerance to acceptance, modeling and fostering accepting attitudes in the classroom, and embracing diversity as an integral part or component to our society. A lot of times when we're identifying diverse learners, we may include a framework to support and provide those interventions through the multi-tiered system of support. And that is what I use in the acronym MTSS. MTSS is a proactive and preventative framework that integrates data and instruction to maximize student achievement, social, emotional, and behavioral needs from a strengths-based perspective. MTSS is a framework to provide targeted support to struggling students with high quality instruction and intervention, social and emotional learning, and positive behavior supports necessary to ensure positive outcomes. The framework is comprised of four essential components. You want to screen students, you want to progress monitor students, you want to make sure that you have those students in that multi-level prevention system, and then you want to make sure that you make data-based decisions to support diverse learners through MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support. When we think of the multi-tiered system of support, if you're an educator, you might be familiar with the triangle. If you're a parent, you might have heard about it. So let me explain how we support diverse learners through the multi-tiered system of support. Well, one thing we want to do is we use universal screeners as a systematic process for identifying students who may be at risk for learning outcomes, like I said, based on their academics, behavior, social, emotional, school completion, and college and career readiness outcomes. With progress monitoring, teams work together using valid and reliable tools and focus on fidelity of implementation for interventions with the consideration of cultural and linguistic responsiveness and recognition of the student's strengths. Through this, we use that multi-level system of support, which include 3 tiers, but I'm really going to say 4 tiers for instruction, intervention, and support. Teams use screening and progress to monitor that data, to make decisions about instruction, and they move within the levels. Students are supposed to be here in your classroom, but based on their needs, you're going to use the different levels to identify how to target instruction, progress monitoring, and interventions to support that student using those database decisions. Within the multi-level system, intensification of education supports. So as we go up the triangle, the level of supports intensify. And the identification of students with disabilities may come about based on the student's responsiveness of those interventions. With identification of those methods, we follow various state laws to identify students for special education. So, like I said, most students are here and most teachers want their students to be here in the classroom. But as students respond to the universal screenings and instruction, over time, they may need level 2 supports, which include small group and interventions, or they may require more intensive supports, which includes some one-on-ones, some small groups, maybe even some 504 services. And then if those students are not successful with this level of support, then they might need that special education tier 4 supports, in which school districts will follow the special education guidelines and state laws to identify a student with a disability under Section 504 or under IDEA. So this is how we support our diverse learners with the triangle and making sure that we provide the intervention of supports and the practicum of services from bottom to top through the tiers of MTSS. I mentioned universal screeners. Well, I also want to talk about some universal designs for learning. UDL is an approach to teaching and learning that gives all students an equal opportunity to succeed. The goal of universal designs for learning is to use a variety of teaching methods to remove any barriers to learning through multiple means. So we want to make sure that we're engaging students through engagement, through the representation, through actions, and through expression. The core principles of the multi-tier system of support is to plan, implement, and sustain that student with fidelity, sustaining those interventions with fidelity. And then we want to align those core principles with the universal design of learning to provide those supports to access learning through, like I said, engagement, learning through representation, learning through actions, and learning through expression to support students and help level that playing field with interventions. Looking at supporting students with MTSS and under the universal design of learning, differentiated instruction is the core of those things. Tomlinson defines differentiated instruction as a philosophy of teaching based on the premise that students learn best when their teachers accommodate the differences in their readiness levels, interests, and learning profiles. She is the queen of differentiated instruction. And so, like I said, differentiated instruction using the multi-tier system of support with the tiers of instruction for the student from general to intensive, and then those universal designs of learnings all support diverse learners. Differentiating can be performed in a variety of ways, and if teachers are willing to use this philosophy in the classroom, they can opt for a more effective practice that responds to the needs of diverse learners. And that's straight from Tomlinson as far as differentiated instruction. So those are some things that we want to do, and we want to make sure we recognize when we're looking at and serving our students who are diverse learners. Just want to add a little bit more about differentiated instruction. Tomlinson maintains that differentiated instruction is not just an instructional strategy, rather, it is an innovative way of thinking about teaching and learning. So, what you do when you're differentiating instruction is you're thinking about, I have this student here with this diverse academic background, or I have this student with this linguistic different background, or I have this student with a social emotional who comes from a different social emotional background. How can I engage the student with innovative ways to teach them at their level and acknowledge their backgrounds, their readiness levels, their language, and their interests to help promote learning? Differentiated instruction sees the learning experience as a social and collaborative process. The responsibility for what happens in the classroom is first to the teacher and then to the learner, because you teachers are the focal point and the navigator of learning within the classroom. So if you're engaging in strategies and valuing that student's background and differentiating and changing your instruction to meet that student's background, readiness levels, language, interests, and learning profiles, eventually students will become intrinsically motivated and interested in the content because they are familiar with the content, and that will engage a differentiated instructive environment which supports diverse learners. When differentiating instruction, teachers, and I'm saying teachers for this, but it's also going to be for parents at home or working with their child. Teachers can differentiate instruction through content, process, product, affect, and the environment. So when you're thinking about differentiating instruction, you want to make sure that you're encouraging learning environments that support learning. You have that quality curriculum with those universal designs of learnings, and then you have those formative assessments to give you that data to determine how you need to go back and reteach, or how a student is progressing with a standard or with content, and it informs how you can navigate your teaching and learning. And like I said, can be for a teacher. Differentiating instruction and supporting differentiating instruction can be for leaders, but it's also can be for parents as well when you're working with your student at home. The overall overarching goal is to make sure that you're meeting those students where they are and you're using that content, the processes, the product, the affect, and the environments, differentiating those things to help support students. So, for instance, if you're doing a math skill, then you might differentiate that content to make that connection with that student in whatever the math skill is, or process. If you're doing a certain process in your classroom, you may consider your students' backgrounds and work with processes that they are familiar with and they can make those connections with. When you're looking at different things as far as the product, and you want to see how you can adjust that product to help diversify that background so students can support you, so that you can support students learning. And then finally, your environment. You want to make sure that your classroom environment is providing those multiple modalities of learning to reach students in varying ways. So you might have your students who are visual learners, kinesthetic learners, who learn better when they see things, those who learn better with hands-on approaches, those who learn better through hearing things. So those things are some of the ways that you differentiate instruction to meet those diverse learner needs based on their backgrounds and help them make connections to learning. So just to give you a little essential tips, and this essential tips can go for leaders, parents, and educators. Like I said, you want to make sure that you are, when you're differentiating instruction and working with diverse learners, you actually you have that universal design to identify the students' needs. So the universal screeners and the universal design to identify those students' needs, so you know how you need to inform your instruction and what skills you need to work on with the student. Throughout the instruction, you want to make sure that you're valuing your diverse learners and activating their prior knowledge. So noticing what those students come into your classroom with their prior knowledge and making those connections to the prior knowledge so they're able to attain new goals and new knowledge. Identify those key vocabulary. You want to make sure that you understand your diverse learners background, and that you identify vocabulary words and things that they can connect to make those connections and then build upon that. Cooperative groups, students learn very well from each other, so you want to make sure there's some cooperative groups. And with the cooperative groups, you might have some students who are high learners and students who are maybe lower learners learning from each other and working from each other. And then you might have some homogeneous groupings where you have those like-minded students working together and you're reteaching, but then you also may have some heterogeneous grouping where you have, like I say, your higher learners and your learners that are not quite there working together cooperatively, learning from each other. You want to have those hands-on, authentic learning opportunities. A lot of students do really well with those actual tangible experiences in the classroom. So hands-on activities, science experiments, just different things with actually using their hands and their critical thinking and minds and actually doing things physical besides writing everyday paper and pencil. Some actual different various assignments where they're learning. Make the curriculum personal and allow those personal connections. Like I said, you want to make sure you activating prior knowledge. You providing those hands-on, authentic learning opportunities that you have in the students' group. You're making sure that you're teaching vocabulary that they can make connections with and connecting that vocabulary. You want to encourage oral, reading, and writing skills for the student. So it's a combination of all three where you're engaging that student. And that may come from the cooperative groups, that may come from the vocabulary, that may come from the authentic learning opportunities. Providing that non-linguistic representations. So using pictures and objects to actually divide and provide those representations so students can make those connections. Allow reteaching and repetitive opportunities. So once you are gathering data and you're assessing your student, now you have some time to go back and reteach those skills that the students need to have fine-tuned as they move through the tiers of the MTSS process. And then engage higher order thinking skills. We want to develop learners who think outside the box and who can think on their own. So using a variety of all of these are ultimately going to help the student, but you want to make sure that you're also engaging in those higher order skills for the students. When you're thinking about working with your diverse learners, you want to focus on the successes, you want to learn from the losses, because this is how you're going to actually work with your students to build that inclusive, diverse learner environment where students are successful. So now it's time. So now it's time for the book excerpt. And I just want to mention that in all of my books, Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders, Essential Tips for Parents, Essential Tips for Educators, and Essential Tips for Section 504 coordinators and books, I talk about the RTI and the MTSS process for students. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read just an excerpt from one of my books, and the chapters that I have the MTSS and RTI process in is the knowledge is power chapter. So if you look at the knowledge of, I address MTSS, the multi-tier system of support, and RTI processes, and the knowledge is power chapter of each book. And my essential tips for special education leaders, knowledge is power, starts on page 105. So let me flip and just give you a little excerpt about RTI and the MTSS process, because that is so important when you are working with diverse learners. It's also important when you're working and identifying those students with disabilities. In order to identify and determine what levels of support students need, you need to follow this process with fidelity to actually reach those diverse learners and ensure that they're getting all the services they may be privy to in the educational setting. And for parents, I'm giving you this information because a lot of times teachers will come and talk to you about your child needed interventions. Well, by listening to this and knowing what MTSS is, you'll understand that you are a vital person and a vital part of that process. And you'll understand what teachers mean when they say RTI or MTSS and how that's going to benefit your child. Maybe a position that you lead or oversee in your school. When I served in various leadership roles, I managed response to intervention, student support teams, Section 504, and special education. Although these are separate programs within themselves, some leaders tend to categorize them the same, not realizing that each program is different. One program may lead to special education, but each one has a systematic process to support students and produce unique outcomes. RTI or MTSS is the multi tier system of support, and its approach is to close achievement gaps through early intervention. According to the National Association of State Directors of Special Education Policy Guide, RTI is the practice of providing high quality instruction intervention matched to students' needs by analyzing learning rate and level of performance over time to make important educational decisions. And then as I go on in the book, I talk about the six core principles that are aligned with RTI and the major components that include the RTI, which are the ones that I actually mentioned already on the site when I talked about the core principles, which include screening, progress monitoring, multi-level prevention systems, database decisions, include the triangle, and I have a copy of the triangle in the book and how that supports outcomes, and then the ways that you support students with the universal design of learning and the core principles of MTSS, like I said, which are plan, implement, sustain with fidelity. So that came from Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. And I actually read page 118 through 119 in the book, which talks about response to intervention, and MTSS, and how that supports students, and how all those programs actually work to support diverse learners. So please check out and grab your copy of the book. That's my book expert for today. We want to make sure that we gain knowledge and learn ways to support those diverse learners. And like I said, when we think about diverse learners, now you know which population of students that I'm talking about when I say I support diverse learners, which is all those students with those varying backgrounds that need support in the curriculum based on gender, ethnicity, linguistic, academic ability and disabilities, physical ability and disabilities, sexual orientation, social economics, religion, culture, personal background, and experiences. So those are diverse learners, and MTSS, differentiated instruction, and the universal design of learning all can support diverse learners along with the necessary services that they need if they need special education or Section 504 services, or if they're an English speaker of other language students.
You've got mail.
Now it's time for my essential advice. Feel free to ask me anything. This is the time where I want to open up the floor. So if you have any questions you want to ask or have some advice about a diverse learner or situation, or if you're a parent who has a question, please feel free to email me at edufaithforall@gmail.com. That is EDUFAITH, the number 4ALL@gmail.com. Give advice. Also, if you have an inspirational story or an event that you would like to highlight, please feel free to email that inspirational story, and I would love to feature it on this podcast. So essential advice or an inspirational story. We'll love to hear it. We'll love to showcase it. I love the positive vibes with supporting those diverse learners. So for our words of wisdom for today, I'm going to give you two. It says, when everyone is included, everyone wins. And that is from Jesse Jackson. And then the second quote is, the diversity, the greater the perfection. Because we all want to recognize and support diverse learners and their different gifts that they bring into the classroom and what makes us all unique. So that's our word of wisdom and quote for today. If you're in need of any services, remember I have EduFaith Educational Services, which is where this podcast comes from. EduFaith Educational Services is my business consulting for parents, educators, and leaders. I provide accommodation, advocacy, and support, consulting and training, parent education trainings, college and career coaching, business, district professional development training. And this training could be about diverse learners and topics under IDEA, special education, English speakers of other languages, educational leadership, Section 504 interventions. Also, I assist for program development. So if you're looking to revamp a program related to IDEA, Section 504, multi-tier system of support, student support teams, and any type of diverse learner in training, I am here for you. So I can help program develop, and I can help provide that professional development as well. And then I also coach educators and leaders. Would love to hear from you. I'm located at www.edufaithconsulting.com. That's www.edufaithconsulting.com. Love to hear from you. So to all my believers, be blessed. And to all my others, be kind, be well, and be the change. Thank you for listening and joining me for another episode of EduFaith Essentials. Please feel free to subscribe and follow EduFaith Essentials on YouTube. Follow EduFaith Essentials on all podcast platforms, which include Pandora, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, podcasts. Also, you can follow me on LinkedIn under EduFaith Essentials, Facebook under EduFaith Educational Services, and Instagram under EduFaith 2021. I'd love to have the followers. I have different information, and I post daily on social media, great information and resources for families. So thank you once again for listening to EduFaith Essentials, and you all have a wonderful day.